Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are here with Mr. George Odom. He is running for the 17th Judicial Circuit Court of Broward County, Group 16. Good evening to you, Mr. Odom. How you doing, sir?
I'm well. Good evening to you, gentlemen.
Well, good evening, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to stop by the Adams Brothers podcast and speak with us. We know you had a long day, so we won't try and keep you too long. So
No worries.
All right. So why don't we just jump right on in and tell the people about you, where you grew up at, about your education, and just tell us what made you want to run for office to be a judge.
Well, first and foremost, thank you and your brother for having me, and thank you for those who will watch and who are watching for having me as well. It's always a pleasure to come before the people of Broward County. So just a little bit about George Odom. I was born and raised in Jacksonville, Florida. So I'm an implant. I did not get down here until 2013, February of 2013. Before all of that happened, at 17 years old, I signed up for the United States Marine Corps. That was over 20 years ago.
Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service.
Not a problem. Thank you. I wanted to give back. I wanted to do more. I grew up raised primarily by a single mother, which is a common story for young African-American men across the nation. Humble beginnings, had a lot of negative influences around me. And so I needed to get out of the city, and I needed to get somewhere where I can be productive and where I can get the discipline, determination, and will to do more for my community as well as for the people of the state of Florida, which is what desired me to sign up for the Marine Corps. I did a total of 8 years of honorable service. I got out of the Marine Corps, and I worked couple years blue collar job with an automotive industry company. I worked another 2 years, almost 2 years with a Fortune 500 investment bank. Went to the University of North Florida, a finance major, econ minor. And then I got that itch again. I say, hey, I want to continue to do more there for my community and for the people of this great state. And I noticed, hey, there's not a lot of there's not a lot of African-American males in law. However, there were a lot of African-American males who perhaps were subjects of the law, I should say. And so I said, maybe that's something that I can do, and I can get in and I can be positive and make a positive change. So I went to Florida Coastal School of Law. I worked through primarily mostly law school as well as undergrad until I obtained my degree. I then got an offer from Howard Finkelstein to come down here in 2013 to work at the Public Defender's Office, where I'd worked for 3 years. And then I decided I wanted to lay out my own shingle, that there was more I wanted to do in the private sector, as well as public work sector. And so I opened up my own firm. I now manage a 2-partner firm with 2 offices, one in Broward, one in Palm Beach County, where we handle primarily family litigation, civil litigation, and state and federal criminal law. And that's pretty much what brought me to this point. Now, the key question is, why do I want to be a judge? Well, primarily it's about service. On the bench, that we have individuals that are on the bench that are being fair, that are exhibiting the proper behavior, professionalism, conduct, integrity. And I stepped up to the plate, hoping that the people of Broward County will see me fit to be their next circuit court judge. And at least on August 18th, 40 some odd percent saw my vision or see my vision. And I'm hoping that that comes to fruition here on November 3rd.
Okay, well, you're pretty well-rounded. You worked in the private sector and the public sector, so you've been on both sides there.
Yes. It's as my mother would say, it's been a long road, but we still have more miles to walk.
Absolutely. I like that too. Our mothers always come up with these good quotes that stick in our minds, and from a little child up until we're adults, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I heard you speak about more faces that look like ours when you were introducing yourself. So that leads me on into my first question of what are your views on the need for more diversity on the bench and the manner in which the court treats members of different races, particularly Black people?
Well, as a past president of the Thomas J. Reddick, aka TJ Reddick Bar Association, one of my key platforms were diversity on the bench. During my presidential tenure was the time period, and I can't take all the credit for it, but I will take some what would be allowed. We at that point had the most African American / Black judges on the bench that we have ever had in Broward County. Now, of course, I came in on the tail end of many hardworking people who probably did a bulk of the work. But as the president, you kind of get to take the credit in part for it. Now, and I'm a strong advocate of diversity on the bench, and not just diversity, but experience and diversity on the bench in order to exhibit to the public and to a majority minority county that the system is fair and that people will be treated fair. A lot of it is about perception. And when you walk into a courtroom, you want to be able to see that diversification across the courtroom, and especially, at least in some courtrooms, from the bench, so that you feel like you will get a fair shake when it comes to the matters that you have or matter that you have before the court.
Okay, that's good. But we spoke to one of your opponents about that same question there, and for some reason my point couldn't just come out because I was trying to tell him the same thing, that when you walk into a courtroom, you would like to see some faces that looks like ours. And to be inside of a courtroom is very, very intimidating. I know it is for me. I'm speaking on from my own personal experience, just being inside of a courtroom, just looking around. In the back of my mind, I'm kind of feeling like I'm not going to get a fair verdict or whatever, and it's just somewhat intimidating, you know. And it's good to see Black faces. I'm going to just come out and say Black faces inside the courtroom, all over, not just on the bench, but all over that courtroom, you know.
Absolutely. It is a very critical and important component to making sure that our justice system not only is fair, but it appears to be fair.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for answering that question, Wayne.
Yes, Mr. Odom. Have you ever been disciplined by the Florida Bar?
No, sir. And I actually was appointed by the chief judge to be the chair of the 17th Judicial Circuit Professionalism panel, which in short basically means for the 10,000 plus lawyers in Broward County and all the litigants that will come before the court, if you had an issue where you thought maybe the lawyer had done something unprofessional, or if the lawyers had behaved in such a way that may question their professionalism, they would submit a referral to the panel, which I was the chair. I would make the determination on whether or not it goes to a formal proceeding. And then, of course, if there was something there, there were some other options that we could try to do to help encourage, to educate, and motivate those persons, especially the lawyers, specifically the lawyers, to make sure that they were upholding the canons and standards of the Florida Bar in their license.
Okay. Can you explain your judicial philosophy to us if you were elected judge?
Well, you know,
philosophy.
Absolutely. I know there are two key philosophies that are common to most folk. I don't consider myself a strict constructionism, nor do I consider myself a liberal activist when it comes to the reading of the text of the Constitution. I think that you have to take a standpoint from both approaches and have an open mind when you are looking at facts, when you are looking at the law. I'm not the one to sit here and say that, when the Constitution was drafted, that the founders had Facebook in mind. And therefore, maybe there needs to be some additional reading and some additional resources that need to be filtered out in order to try to understand how that fits into today's time. But I also understand that some things like cruel and unusual punishment may be a little clearer, maybe, I said maybe, than other issues, because that may have been taking place back then. So I don't parse sides with either one. I think I'm fairly reasonable and open-minded and down the middle, and I think that's necessary for you to be a well-rounded judge.
Do you consider yourself a politician?
I don't. I've been a public servant since 2000, the year 2000, August 18th, when I raised my right hand, swore to uphold the truth and to defend this country from enemies, both foreign and domestic. I've served. My mother served. My father served. Biological father, even though he wasn't in the household, he did serve. My stepfather served. My niece serves. My nephew serves. We serve. And as long as the people of Broward County see that we are doing the job of the people, for the people, and by the people, not for ourselves or for any politics or favoritism or nepotism or anything like that, then we'll serve happily and proudly.
Okay. How would you balance being an independent judge and an elected official?
Well, I think that goes back to my military service. At the end of the day, we were told you have a job to do. When you are tasked with a job, people expect you to carry the responsibilities of that job. You may not always like your orders, but you have orders. My orders is the Constitution, state and federal. And I may not necessarily like the orders, but I must follow those orders. Some groups may not necessarily like my decisions based upon the law that I'm following, but I have those orders and I will follow those orders. I've said it before and I'll say it again. When and if the people feel like I'm no longer need to be at their will, then so be it. I'm not looking to per se try to just sit back and get this position to retire. I'm not sitting here to try to maybe gain some new friends or associates. I'm here to do a job and I will do that job. And I can't promise how I'd rule, but I can promise that whenever you come into my courtroom, no matter your race, your color, your sexual identity, etc., you will be treated fair, the law will be followed, but also I will use humility, I will use common sense, and I will make sure that it's fair across the board.
Okay, and since you spoke of equality across the lines, how would you work to ensure equality for all people of all backgrounds in your courtroom?
Well, I believe with my uniquely diversified background that I've walked in a lot of shoes, as it's been mentioned, or at least suggested earlier. You have to be able to try to at least put yourself in others' position. Try to understand where others are coming from. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to agree, but you have to have an open mind. The being a good judge, I think, requires that. When you have a narrow understanding of things or a narrow scope of what you think things should be, or if you only serve from the point of view of what you know, then I think you do many people a injustice. Because everyone doesn't come from where you come from. Everyone doesn't like what you like and agree with what you agree with. So in order to make sure that the system remains fair, true, and balanced, you have to be able to at least understand to some degree where people are coming from. And then, of course, apply the law, but apply it fairly so that no one feels like they're being treated unfairly simply because of how they may identify or the color of their skin or how much money they may have in their pocket.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Odom.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Mr. Odom, I have a black friend and I have a white friend. Both were arrested for possession of cocaine. My black friend was arrested for crack cocaine. My white friend was arrested for powder cocaine. Both had just about the same record, misdemeanors, minor, run-ins with the law. But my black friend somehow received a harsher sentence than my white friend. And that leads me to my question. How would you, if elected, how would you address the issues of Black defendants receiving harsher and longer treatment and longer sentences than white defendants who have committed the same crime?
Well, of course, I think everything has to be looked at from a judicial perspective on a case-by-case basis. But I also recognize that there has been, and perhaps arguably still are, institutions and programs that have been put in place that has caused some disproportionate sentencing, specifically to your issue of these two gentlemen, concerning systematic disproportionate treatment and perhaps systematic racism in the justice system. So, you know, there's been a number of studies that have been done that outlines that very issue in the state of Florida. I won't opine on any specific one, but I will say this. If your record shows that you, at least in many cases, have disproportionately sentenced Blacks over whites, in some cases up to 700% harsher sentences, I think you really need to take a step back and evaluate what's going on in your courtroom, to be completely candid and honest, and which is partly why I ran. Like I said earlier, a finance major and an econ minor. The numbers are the numbers. Now, oftentimes you will hear individuals say, well, you know, it was agreed upon or this or that or whatever the case may be. Let's be very clear. It is the judge's courtroom, and in a lot of cases, not all, but a lot of cases, judges have discretion. Just because an offer is brought before a judge does not mean that judge has to accept it, especially if that judge feels it's unfair. It's not proportionate as to what the facts allow. Some cases, judges can't do anything, minimum mandatories, your hands are tied. But what I will do is I will make sure I'm looking at every case, factually based and specific and in accordance with the law, doing my best to, if there may be some bias or maybe some type of implicit bias, I should say, that I'm recognizing that. And that I'm making sure that I'm setting that aside and making sure that when I make my rulings and when I make my judgments, that I'm doing so with an eye that the facts are the facts. It's not about the person. It's not about who they are or where they come from, but it's about the law and making sure that the appearance of fairness is there and making sure that we're following the law fairly.
And speaking of implicit bias, if elected, how would you work to minimize implicit bias within the judicial system?
Well, I will start with my election because that would add an additional African-American male, African-American, I should say, on the bench. Broward County has 90 judges total, and only 10 of them are of African-American or Black descent. That's a problem when 33% of the county is African-American male, African-American, another 30 some odd percent are Hispanic, and then the rest are split up amongst the other ethnicities. So, you know, that's one thing. Two is education and just being engaged with your colleagues. A lot of, even with lawyers, as a lawyer, you know, I didn't know what I didn't know until I sat down with somebody who knew what I didn't know. And then I was like, wow, you really look at things that way. I may not agree, but I was able to give them a new perspective. And they may not have accepted that perspective, but at least they could understand it. So I think education, I think continuing to push for that continued getting more lawyers, Hispanic, African-American, et cetera, on the bench, not just the traditional, will help the image and will help educate and diversify the bench and help, at least in some regards, reduce that age-old attaché of, you know, and nothing against my white brothers and sisters, but quite frankly, a lot of them grew up a certain way, especially if you've been practicing law for a long time. Like, I'm a student of history. So if you've been practicing law for 40 years and I'm dating you back, I'm from Jacksonville. They didn't start desegregating to the late 60s. So we need new, fresh perspective as to individuals who are on not across the board. We want that experience, but we need to make sure we have individuals on the bench that can see things in a 360 and not just a 180.
And I didn't know that there was 90 judges. Out of 90 judges, there were only 10 blacks in the whole, out of that whole group of judges, only 10 black judges, and 30% of them were Hispanic, are Hispanic.
No. We have a population of roughly 34% Hispanic in Broward and another 33% blacks.
Okay,
Hispanics no worries. We have more than 10 Hispanics on the bench. I can tell you that. I just don't want to lock myself into a specific number.
Right.
It's not in comparison to the population of Hispanics here in the county, but it is more than 10.
Okay. Thank you. Wayne?
Yes, Mr. Odom, when you were working in the public defender's office under Howard Finkelstein, how was the atmosphere there working there as a public defender? Did you feel a hostile working environment or tensions between public defenders and other public defenders there?
Well, as a PD, it's the very nature of the job is adversarial, and it's high strung. Thankfully, I had training prior to going into that type of situation where I was able to handle it maybe better than others. But overall, there was a good group of individuals that were there. I'm not going to say it was a rosebed full of gardens, but what I will say is it helped prepare us for the challenges that we had that was before us. And what I mean by that is dealing with an office, opposing counsels that are very well versed, very well educated, and seeking to employ every resource they have to lock up your client, dealing with oftentimes judges that may not see things the way that you have seen things and have your experience, and dealing with jurors that oftentimes we're not well represented in the jury box. So the environment was not daisies and roses, but the goods definitely, in my opinion, outweigh the bads.
Okay, yeah, because we heard a lot coming out of that office there. A lot of it been denied in the press that, the atmosphere that was harbored there. I'll just say it like that. And I just wanted to get someone else's perspective on that, about how, the things that went on there. Do you think the change that was just made, do you think that was for the best?
Which change are we talking about?
Mr. Weeks in that office.
I will say this. I've worked under Mr. Weeks, and I worked closely with Ms. Green. I see both of their points, and I see where they're coming from. I would always prefer that we could come to a middle ground and try to alleviate the additional frustration. But of course, that's not what appeared to have happened. But in totality, I think it's also, I think a lot of it's subjective. You got to understand, you're talking to a Marine. So what oftentimes some people may consider to be harsh and hostile, I'm like, this is regular business for me. Ain't nobody shooting at me, right? So I'm doing good. But that's not to say that for others, they did not feel totally different. And so I believe I believe both people had a very solid vision for what they felt the office should be doing. The voters chose, and I will ride with the voters. That's their decision.
Okay. I wanted to ask you that because, I like that from talking to people from now on, I like to ask them about the atmosphere there. But from your experience, do you think the public defenders there are giving it their all to defend the defendants, to represent the defendants that's there.
I would say this in all sincerity. I was always given what I needed personally, right? But I would also say this. I think that we as a country have to really determine how much value we want to put on the right to counsel. Because at the end of the day, a lot of those PDs over there who are working hard and giving it their all, they may not have all the resources they feel they should have. And to be quite frank, a lot of it it's very political and what resources are available, right? It may not necessarily be the denial of someone in the office, but it may just be what's afforded to you that's allotted budgetary wise, etc. So I really feel like to help improve this justice system on both sides, state attorney side, they are overworked as well. I would assume. I've never been a state attorney, but we have to start making sure we want to live by the creed of the document that we stand by, which is all should be treated equal, all should be treated fairly, all should be entitled to counsel. And that may mean more resources should be thrown towards in those directions. But of course, that's out of my bag, and so I won't chime in. That's just something that may be a consideration. I have no real opinion on it outside of live up to the words of the very document that we stand by.
Okay. How would you handle conflicts of interest on the bench?
Simple. If there is one, then you need to recuse yourself. If you feel like there's a conflict, you should recuse yourself so that the individual can make sure that they feel like they're receiving a fair shake. But it's a case-by-case type of situation. You got to look at the facts, or correction, I should say this, because you're not supposed to chime in on the substantive matter of the motion. If it's legally sufficient, you grant it. If it's not, you deny it, and you move forward.
And how would you define injustice? How would you define it?
I think I would define injustice in that I believe when, as a father and as an African American male, when you have 17% of the state of Florida, roughly speaking, makes up African American males, but then you have 55%, roughly, of the prison population, incarcerated population, makes up African American males. That may give you an answer. Is it injustice? Depends on who you ask. Is there a problem there? I definitely think that that's a problem. What can we do as judges to help improve the equality and eliminate the disproportionate sentencing of individuals? Well, there's, in my opinion, many things we can do, but it first starts with, again, humility, open-mindedness, proper temperament, and understanding that we're a great country. We can be better. We're great, but we can be better, and we need to continue to strive to do that.
And if there was an injustice in your courtroom, how would you confront it?
It depends on what the quote-unquote perceived injustice is. There are a number of avenues and resources that you can, or I should say, number of things that a judge can do when there's something that we can opine on. Now, keep in mind, you're really kind of the middleman, the referee, making sure that the law is followed, and as they would say, call the balls and the strikes. So sometimes you can't necessarily get involved in the dispute between two lawyers outside of this is the law and making sure they're keeping the proper decorum and professionalism in the courtroom. But I can tell you this, if it is something that the law allows me to chime in on, I will not be shy about addressing that issue and addressing it appropriately in accordance with the law.
Okay. And what are the biggest changes you think need to be made to our justice system?
Well, we have I think access to courts is a big deal. It has become very expensive to bring matters before the courts. Not at the court's fault at all. The billable rates, the hours, the fees, and then of course you have people who take off from work, they come down to the courthouse, then they wait around maybe for a couple of hours before they get in front of the judge, and then they're paying their lawyers per hour in order to address their issues, and they're on a fixed income, and they can't really afford to be away from work as much as they are, but they don't have a choice because they got to be in the courtroom. I think we need to, I like what's going on now. Unfortunately, it was kind of forced upon us, but with the virtual approaches that are being taken, that reduces a lot of the stress of having to take off from work, pay for parking, pay your lawyer, these monies to be maybe sitting around in the courtroom. And then, of course, to deal with whatever comes in the courtroom addressed. And one thing that we need to continue to make sure that it should not be about how much money's in your body. That's another issue. Sometimes whoever can pay for the biggest, baddest, quote unquote lawyer, then, they may get better results than others. But the system is not set up like that. It shouldn't be set up like that. And so we need to make sure we're addressing that. Professionalism. You don't want to spend all that money, time, and effort to come into a courtroom and be demeaned or belittled or threatened, et cetera, et cetera. You don't want that additional hostility, especially coming from the very place where you're supposed to be getting your rulings and your proper temperament, and they're supposed to be setting that environment. So I think that's one thing. Understanding, we've had a lot of, unfortunately, deaths recently with lawyers. It's a very stressful job. We want to make sure that at least when they get in the courtroom, it's going to be about their legal arguments. It's going to be about the case law. It's going to be about the facts, and not about because you may not like a person, or because they didn't necessarily do what you wanted them to do when they did it as fast as you wanted them to do it. Now you're creating an additional hostile environment, which it just does not help the perception of the system. Neither does it help filter out equal justice, in my opinion.
Yeah, I remember hearing about the attorney I used to see on TV, Fender Shop. I believe his son killed him, and then I don't know if the son killed himself, but I remember the son killed him. I saw on the news the other day. Very tragic. But thank you. That's all I have for you, Mr. Odom.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions.
Okay, I have a few more questions here. If elected, how would you deal with mentally ill defendants in your court?
So again, I think this is where I become uniquely qualified in the context that having served during wartime, mental illness is real. Lawyers, we just talked about that, who have perhaps taken their lives due to maybe some mental issues. It's real. We have to understand that each person that comes into that courtroom is an individual. And they carry their own issues, they carry their own mental health standards, I guess I would say. And so we want to be compassionate to that. We want to make sure that we're getting them, if we can, and if the law allows, what they need. Now, again, the lawyers do a lot of the legwork. But at the end of the day, if there's something that can be done from the bench, or transferring a case to mental health court because it may be necessary, if that can be done and the facts support it, then absolutely. We want to make sure that we're taking care of people across the board and not, treating people, I guess I should say, as if they don't have an issue when the facts clearly show that they do.
And another question, has anyone in your campaign that you know of posted anything offensive on social media?
Say again?
Has anyone in your campaign posted anything offensive on social media that you know of?
No, not that I have directed, not that I know of, and not that I have any knowledge of.
Okay. Well, we ask everybody that question, and they kind of look at us like, "What are you talking about?" You know. But we want to be uniform with the questions, you know. So we want one person to feel like you asked me that question and you didn't ask him that question. So you know, we ask everybody that question on this podcast.
No problem. No problem.
I got one more question because I want to ask this because I don't want to be accused of not asking. How do you feel about the Black Lives Matter movement for justice that's going on right now?
Well, I won't speak specifically on quote unquote how I feel about the movement, I should say, because it may be an issue that comes before me if the voters see fit to elect me. Here's what I will say. I think it's fairly clear, at least to me, that we have issues when it comes to racism in this country. We have issues when it comes to unfair treatment. We have issues, and we're talking about immigrants, we're talking about blacks, we're talking about LGBTQ. So it's not just a color thing. We as a country have some real issues we need to address. And when we're talking about accusations of police brutality, excessive force, like I said, I'm a student of color. I'm not naive enough to say that some people don't receive excessive force. It's just, I'm just not that guy. Is it probably a large percentage of police officers? I doubt it. I think it's probably a very, very small percent, but there probably is a percent. We have to make sure that those who are not following the law, not upholding their creed in whatever profession that they're working, that they're held accountable. People have the First Amendment right of free speech. As long as you're not violating any laws, as long as you're not placing anybody in danger, as long as you're not doing anything that will question or jeopardize the very fabric that many men and women fought to defend and uphold, then the law allows you to do that. And so I have no position on whether I'm for or against it, but as a student of history, I believe in the Constitution, and the Constitution says you have a right to say what you feel you need to say as long as you're doing it in a nonviolent manner, or as one great man would say, we have the right to protest against injustices if we feel like we are being treated unfairly. Peacefully, of course.
Yeah, and the subject of qualified immunity, that's been the subject of conversation since the George Floyd, since probably before that. I think it came more into play after George Floyd and after certain other cases came in to play. Do you think how do you feel about qualified immunity? I mean, I don't know if you can touch on that, but do you think it should be taken away from protections from a police officer? Do you think it should be taken away?
So I can't answer that question. But again, I will say this. We have thousands of men and women that go out their doors every day to keep us safe. That's without question. And I applaud every last one of them. Whether or not we should hold officers to a lesser or higher standard, that's not within my purview. That's a legislative issue. You know, they get to make that decision. I just have to follow the law and the interpretation of it. But what I will say is this. It's unfortunate that you do have a small number, I believe, that spoils the whole bunch, I guess, and at least the perception of the whole bunch. And we need to continue to make sure that if we run into those individuals, that small number, no matter how small it may be, that they're held accountable in accordance with the law. As for the other probably 99.9% cops, the officers out there who are doing their job, doing it faithfully, diligently, and honorably, hats off to them. I've served. I know how it is. And we continue to pray for them every day that they come home safe. But in the same breath, I know mothers and fathers pray that their children can leave the house and come home safe and not end up being killed or whatever the case may be, just based upon how they believe or the color of their skin. Everybody wants to come home safe.
And this is my last question. How do you feel as a Black veteran, with military service? How do you feel about the football players taking a knee for racial injustice? How do you feel personally?
I think I'll just reiterate my previous answer. As long as it's done peacefully, if the First Amendment is abided by, there's no laws being broken. I don't know the specifics with the bargaining agreements and all that stuff. But again, I am a student of history, and I'm a true believer of speaking up against injustices when you can do that and when it's appropriate. And so I would say this. As long as individuals are following the law, not breaking the law, not placing anyone in danger, and they're exercising their First Amendment right, that's what the Constitution allows, and you should exercise it if you see fit.
So it don't offend you by them taking a knee? What I'm asking, that's the question I was asking.
No, I take no position on it either way. It's a personal decision. It doesn't make me feel like anybody it doesn't make me feel any way, either way. I'm okay at the end of the day.
Okay. That's it for me.
Well said. We'll leave it at that. Okay, Mr. Odom, you have the floor. We're going to let you close us out. So tell the people of Broward County and the voters who will be going to the polls on November the 3rd, why they should elect you to the 17th Judicial Circuit Court of Broward County, Group 16.
Well, thank you, and thank you again for both you and your co-hosts or your brother there for having me, and again, the listeners who will and who are listening. I think it comes down to this. You want someone who has a diversified and are uniquely qualified experience to not only sit on the bench and be able to make the hard decisions, but that can handle that stressful and tough job post. It's not easy by any stretch of the imagination, but you want somebody who's going to get up there and who's going to do what needs to be done and do it fairly and equitably across the board. You want someone with the right experience, not just experience, because as my mother would say, I know old fools and I know young fools. So you want someone who has the right experience, someone who can understand from a broad aspect of where people are coming from. You want someone with the proper judicial temperament. You want someone who can manage a courtroom, someone who's going to work hard, who's going to dedicate themselves to the core principles of the law and not to others or to other groups or to other biased interests. You want George Odom Jr. on that bench. I will go into that courtroom every day. It's not about color. It's not about race. It's not about gender. It's about the law. It's about making sure that the people of this county get the right representation that they need from the judiciary, making sure that they're treated fairly, making sure that they're treated honestly, making sure that when they leave, they feel like and they know that they got a fair shake before the judge, someone with the right attitude and the right temperament. I am that person. I have the right experience. I am the right choice. On August 18th, 40.4% of you believed in that, and I'm asking that the remainder of you on November 3rd come through, bring it home. Let's put the best and brightest on the bench and make sure that we represent Broward County well. I'm humbled and happy to serve, and I'm always available as your public servant.
Okay, well said. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. George Odom. He is running for judge in the 17th Judicial Circuit Court of Broward County, Group 16. We want to thank you so much for stopping by and taking the time out of your schedule to speak with us and tell us why we should vote for you. And good luck to you, sir, and best wishes if you win. When you win, don't be a stranger. Please come back and talk to us here on the Adams Brothers Podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you, gentlemen.
You're welcome. Have a good evening, sir.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.